Welcome back to the Business of Cannabis. I'm Tim Kirby, Chief Executive of Releaf. In this episode, we're diving into the legal and regulatory landscape shaping the medical cannabis industry in the UK. I'm excited to be joined by Robert Jappie. Robert's a partner at Fieldfisher law firm and a leading expert in life sciences regulation who advises businesses navigating highly regulated sectors, medical cannabis clearly being one of those. Our conversation today unpacks what's really happened since the UK rescheduled medical cannabis back in 2018. Robert shares deep insight into the evolving legal framework, where it's working, where it's not, what the landscape has been historically, and where it is today, and the opportunities and risks it presents for the sector going forward. Okay, let's get into it. Morning, Robert. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me here. Nice to be here.
I'm probably going to get more out of this than you are. Let me explain why. In the privilege that we'll loosely call business leadership as the Chief Exec of Releaf, I think anybody that has these roles is obsessed with the detail, loves to be close to the controllables, and things that are less controllable make us nervous. So I see my job in Releaf really to create the conditions where talent that has more competency than I do can come together, meet some great technology and do some great things. And I think to a large part, we're achieving that. And that's not my opinion. It's there in the data for everyone to see in terms of great patient outcomes, go to Trustpilot, in terms of our ability to acquire patients. We have the greatest share of voice and the most visitors to our website. So I think we're in good shape there. The things that worry me more are the things I can't control. So maybe also for the benefit of our audience, an understanding today of how the regulatory framework sits together, what are the agencies involved and what their responsibilities are. And maybe we could unpack that a little bit to start with. Mm-hmm. And then what's that been historically? Where is it today? And what are the opportunities and risks that presents for the sector going forward? Is that a sensible way for us to run it?
Yeah, sounds good, Tim.
So what does the regulatory landscape consist of for medical cannabis in the UK?
So it's a supply chain business ultimately, right? I like to divide the supply chain up into 4 parts. It seems a bit simplistic, but I find this is a good way to understand it. So the first stage is cultivation and production. Vast majority of medical cannabis being prescribed is coming from overseas, but now we have licensed cultivators and producers here in the UK. Stage 2 is import and distribution. So these are the businesses who are actually bringing the product in, storing it, and sending it out to the pharmacies. Stage 3 is dispensation. So that's the pharmacies where the patients collect their medications. And stage 4 is patient-facing, the clinics, right? Which house the doctors who write the prescriptions. And each of these stages have various regulatory oversight. So further up the supply chain, cultivation, production, import, distribution, you're looking at the Home Office and the MHRA. MHRA is the medicines regulator, and the Home Office is responsible for the regulation of controlled drugs. And obviously, medical cannabis containing THC is a controlled drug. Pharmacies are regulated by the General Pharmaceutical Council, and the clinics, as you will well know, CQC registration, Care Quality Commission, they deal with any businesses engaged in treatment and diagnostic services.
Okay, so CQC, the clinic,
yep.
GPHC, the pharmacy,
yep.
MHRA, the drugs.
And Home Office.
And the Home Office.
Yeah, that's right.
What's their view? 2018, legislation changed. Did they want to set up an industry?
No, that definitely wasn't the plan. That wasn't the intention from Parliament. Going back to that time, there was a stellar media campaign, which appeared on all the front pages of all the major newspapers. Yep. You had mothers going across to Holland or wherever to get cannabis medications for their sick children. And as they come back into the UK, the border force would take that medication off them. And public opinion swung very quickly behind legalisation of medical cannabis. The Home Office was compelled to act, and they did so very, very quickly.
Matter of weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, 6-week consultation. I mean, it's unheard of moving that fast. So 1st of November 2018, they legalised, much to everyone's surprise. And their aim was to give safe and legal access routes to cannabis-based medicines. Mm-hmm. Obviously, going forwards, a number of businesses saw the opportunity and set up very early. Doesn't seem like there was much of an early mover advantage because it was a heavily regulated and difficult environment to work in. Obviously, complaints were made to the government and the regulators saying, "Look, we're trying to run a business here, and your strict regulatory approach is hindering us." And the government response was, well, that's not what you asked us to do. You didn't ask us to create a regulatory environment to foster a lucrative business. You asked us to give access, and that's what we did. So that's very much been the government's position since day one. They're not there to create an environment that's conducive to business.
And there's a right view, because again, it's there as a matter of record that the industry stagnated in terms of patient numbers from 2018. Arguably, in the last 12 months, you start to see more expansion as education and awareness and possibly the stigma has been removed. But that regulatory framework hasn't changed?
No.
Do you think it will change?
I don't think so. I can't see any big changes coming down the line. My own experience, I'm a regulatory lawyer, so right. I engage with the regulators at all stages of the supply chain on a regular basis. My view is that to date, the industry has been too small, really, for them to get too concerned about. Right? Where I've seen interventions is where a complaint has been made to the MHRA or to the Home Office or whoever it might be, and they are compelled to act on that complaint. They haven't been actively looking to intervene in businesses or taking action of their own accord. It is purely when someone has made a complaint.
I think we probably should have picked up on it maybe at the beginning. It'd be good to understand, and for the audience, your background in terms of the medical cannabis sector in the UK and your role at Fieldfisher in terms of the work you've done within the sector since 2018.
I was fortunate enough to set up the UK's first dedicated cannabis regulatory department back in 2018.
I didn't know that, right, okay.
So early 2018, there was a small CBD industry here in the UK, but it was growing quickly. These businesses were doing decent revenues, selling their product online and in Holland and Barrett. And as soon as I set up the department in early 2018, the work started rolling in. These CBD companies had been trying to navigate this complex regulatory environment with very little specialist assistance. My timing was very good. 6-7 months later, the government suddenly legalised medical cannabis. And so from the end of 2018 and early 2019, vast majority of my practice has been advising cannabis companies on all the day-to-day regulatory issues that they face. And that has graduated into full regulatory support for the corporate commercial transactions, the fundraisers, the M&A deals and the IPOs. So I sit in Fieldfisher's regulatory group and I head up the cannabis practice group there. And we're fortunate enough to have great clients. We advise medical cannabis companies, CBD companies, vaping companies, and all of the ancillary businesses that are in and around the industry.
Because I remember I met you pre-revenue, probably the end of 2023, Releaf launching in February 2024, just trying to understand more about the actors in the space and the regulatory framework. And I'm sure at that time you educated me then about what's the parallel between the CBD framework and the medical cannabis framework. Wasn't there some discussion about how they arrived at whatever the level of THC was allowed to be on the shelf at Holland and Barrett?
Yes, so one of the key issues which I was dealing with from 2018 was the amount of THC that was allowed in a CBD consumer product without needing a Home Office license.
And THC, for the layman, being the psychoactive ingredient.
Yeah, it's a cannabinoid in the cannabis plant. Has a wealth of health and wellness benefits, but also has the intoxicating effect of being high.
Okay.
And all CBD products will have trace amounts of THC in them. Some will have more than others. And we were using something called the 1 milligram rule. So Regulation 2 of the Misuse of Drugs regulations. It allows up to 1 milligram of THC in a product, in a bottle, before you need to go and speak to the Home Office.
Okay.
And there was a big debate about whether or not this actually applied to consumer products. And I spent years fighting with the regulators, the police, anyone that would listen over this issue, to the point where the regulators reached out to the Home Office and said, we need clarity on this point. We need to be told whether this applies or not. What is the permitted amount of THC in a consumer product? The minister at the time, the police and crime minister, was Kit Malthouse. So at the request of the Home Office, he initiated a study with the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs. They asked the ACMD, do a report on this, give us a proposal of how this should work. The ACMD turned that round in less than a year. The Home Office sat on that report from the ACMD. Eventually, under further pressure, the Home Office said, we're going to adopt the ACMD proposals. We put it forward to the minister, who wasn't Kit Malthouse anymore. And we waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. So we're probably on our 6th or 7th minister since Kip Molehouse now, and still no approval came from the minister. And in the end, the Home Office and the FSA have now got tired of waiting and gone back to 1 milligram. So it looks like 1 milligram is here to stay. And it's that kind of intransigence from government to engage in these issues, to look at these problems that the cannabis sector has, that makes me feel like there isn't going to be intervention from government to change the regulatory environment as it currently stands.
But something's improved, undoubtedly, Robert, in the last year. Okay, because if I think of the meetings I sat in when we launched in February, and in March we refunded £60,000 to patients because the supply chain just couldn't cope with the volume. You couldn't create consistency of quality of supply of medication, and we couldn't see a way forward at that time. Now, serendipity appeared in the relationship that we built at that time with Glass Farm. They had their first domestically grown harvest. We committed to buy that over an extended period of time. That secured quality and consistency of supply through our distribution network in the UK. Now, what I have seen over the last 12 months is that quality and consistency of supply has improved. So in some ways, whatever's going on is improving patient access to the right kind of medication. Would you concur?
Yeah, so I think the supply chain issues feed into perhaps a group of 4 or 5 serious problems which hampered growth in the medical cannabis sector since 2018. So supply, not just quality of supply, but reliability of supply as well, right? You had clinics securing 100 kilos of a particular product. They'd sell it all. Patients would come back the next month and say, can I have the same thing? And it's not there, right? That's not good supply chain management.
Yeah. It's not a patient outcome.
No, it's not. And relationships with domestic cultivators, improved relationships with overseas cultivators and producers as well to ensure that reliability of supply. That's great. I think that we can say that that's probably been solved for the most part here in the UK. The other issues which I think have hampered progress and which Releaf has certainly contributed to solving, one of the key ones I think is the doctor issue. There haven't been enough doctors willing to prescribe. And as you well know, keeping your doctors happy and comfortable and educated so that they feel that they understand the patients and they understand the medications is really, really important. And marketing and advertising has been very, very restrictive. As we said, you can't advertise prescription medications. I think the clinics are becoming more aggressive, for good or bad, more innovative, and understanding better what they can talk about. They can talk about the quality of their doctors, the customer service, the patient experience, their great staff, without having to talk about, we've got the best weed and the most THC and all this kind of stuff as well. So I think, you can sort of talk to 3 or 4 serious issues which have now been resolved. And I think that's why we're starting to see patient numbers increase.
And I think there's so much in all of that, right? Because if the addressable market is 3% of the adult population, you're not going to get that from people buying black market cannabis.
No.
Okay, so you're going to have to appeal to people that want genuine access to an unmet healthcare need. And in genuine access to an unmet healthcare need, now at Releaf, we have incredibly strict prescribing guidelines. We onboard doctors aligned to those prescribing lines because what we want to try and do is create continuity and consistency to a patient outcome. So again, I think it's back to the presentation of the industry to cannabis naive people and being seen to run healthcare organisations rather than selling cannabis to get people for the recreational market. And I think that is where the increase in penetration into the demographics that wouldn't have considered medical cannabis. Because I still don't think most people I speak to still have no clue that medical cannabis is available in the UK.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And again, this goes to sort of perhaps issues with commercial strategy when this industry first became legal. You had the clinics going after the heavy consumers, the guys that want 70, 80, 90 grams a month, fighting over this small pool of heavy consumers. And the patients, they don't have any loyalty to the clinics. They'll go where they feel they want to be, right? So you just had these clinics fighting over the same pool of patients. And the reality is, if we want to grow this industry here in the UK to where it should be 300, 400, 500,000 patients, you're going to have to go out into the cannabis naive population.
Again, my bias will come out. We've got the most patient advocacy in the sector, if I define that as the volume of reviews we have in Trustpilot. okay, which I think the name clues in the name, Trustpilot, creates the belief and trust in new demographics that they can listen to people that look like you, sound like you, live like you, that have a condition the same as you, that gives them confidence to try an alternative treatment plan. And the volume that we've got in Trustpilot, which is well over 1,000, and it goes up by, 30, 35, 40 a week, whatever the number is. None of them are talking about strains of cannabis. Mm-hmm. You can go through all of them. They're not talking about strains. They're not talking about medication. They're talking about the quality of life improvement they've had, having suffered for an extended period of time where traditional medicine didn't help. I was with Peter Zauner, who's my colleague and peer in the marketing department yesterday. We were with a lady, I won't say her name, who's going to come on board as a patient advocate for endometriosis. Mm-hmm. 12 years of completely misunderstood and misguided diagnosis, becomes a medical cannabis patient, changes her life. Now, I could give you, go for Trustpilot. I'll give you hundreds of examples of that. And I guess I'm just building on your comment that to grow, we have to, as a sector, appeal to the cannabis naive. Mm-hmm. And I think the way the sector presents when it's focused on recreational cannabis strains to appeal to recreational, pseudo-recreational at best cannabis users, actively puts patients off. I don't know, what do you hear around the marketplace and the sector in relation to how that new demographic does open up? How many patients are there at the end of next year? I don't know.
Well, you can take that a step further, I think, as well as pushing out into the cannabis naive population. You've also got to look at delivery methods, which the wider population will be comfortable with. Most people will not be comfortable with cannabis flower, right? Whether you're grinding it up and putting it into a vaporizer or whatever you may be doing it to consume it, the truth is a lot of people who perhaps could benefit from cannabis won't want to get involved in that process, right?
And that's a circle I can't square at the moment. I drive everybody mad internally. The amount of queries we get from patients into our patient support team that are talking about, I've just received this cannabis bud in the post. I've got a grinder. Yeah. I'm supposed to grind it up, stuff it into a tube, put the tube into a vaporizer that heats it up. I've then got to inhale it. Apparently it hurts the back of your throat and I'm coughing uncontrollably, right? So that's the story. Mm-hmm. The lack of noise we get from the patient base always confuses me. We've got a survey at the moment because we have an e-commerce store that sells vaporizers. So we offer everybody's vaporizer there is on the marketplace. The delivery method would be framed as responsible dosage control without combustion. Yep. Right? But nevertheless, you've still got to take a flower, a bud of cannabis, grind it up, put it in a tube, put it in a heating device, which is why I think our partnership with Samai is really interesting. Right? So Samai came to market with something that really appealed for us in terms of targeting those new demographics. Cannabis oil that typically, and again, I'm not a clinician, people will take sublingually under the tongue in the evening to relax them and improve their night's sleep. And we go to our Trustpilot. We've got many examples of how effective that is. But historically, it looked like tar and tasted like, a phrase someone once gave me, licking the bottom of a diesel engine. Right? And then as the industry's matured, the distillation processes have evolved. Samai has an oil, the Essentials range that we have exclusivity in the UK, that looks like extra virgin olive oil. And if you want it flavoured, you can have it any flavoured you want. We choose to have a mint flavour. Now, not all of our patients, interestingly, choose to have it mint flavoured. Sure. Some of them want to have it cannabis flavoured because they have more of a connection to it being a medication because it tastes like what they're used to. So I think that not just the supply chain easing up, but those delivery methods, as you quite rightly say, are starting to open new demographics. We're going to start providing vape carts next month. We've just had our first delivery of 8,000 arrive in the country actually yesterday. So I'm really keen to see the patient feedback. And again, it comes to prescribing guidelines. Mm-hmm. I'm not a patient. I don't use cannabis. But I'm damn sure I'd find it a lot more accessible through a vape cartridge than I would through grinding up flour, heating it up and inhaling it.
I'm sure a lot of doctors will feel much comfortable prescribing these.
That's a very good point.
Oils, gummies,
yes,
vapes. Probably a lot of doctors would feel much more comfortable dealing with those types of products than perhaps they would with flour.
So I think that the industry not only in its ability to go to market effectively with education and awareness, not only in its ability to give confidence and belief and trust in the process because there are prescribing guidelines, it does feel like a healthcare solution, but also then the delivery methods of the products are really starting to change and it doesn't feel like a recreational marketplace.
No, and look, I don't make no bones about it. I would love to see recreational cannabis legalised here in the UK, right? I would.
Do you think that's likely?
No. Right. And
in my lifetime, I'm 58. I always say it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime.
Look, if you think about Canada, right, which went completely legal in 2017,
right,
liberalised, regulated recreational cannabis market. Medical cannabis had been legal in Canada for more than 20 years by that point.
Right.
So we are really early on here. I think the reality in the UK is it's all about the medical market. Until you can get up to 500, 600, 800,000, 1 million patients, there's no point even talking about recreational cannabis. It's not going to happen.
And if we just finish up then maybe on something closer to home, which is the German market, what do we learn from there? Because certainly they've had, a doubling of trebling of medical cannabis patients in the last 12 months.
I completely agree. I don't see why we shouldn't have a medical market here comparable to that of Germany. You know, similar population size, wealthy country. How we get there, I can't see any coalition governments coming up here soon that might be willing to reschedule cannabis. But I do think there are things that have happened in Germany that could equally happen here. So one of the key legal decisions that established the medical market in Germany was there was a court case whereby the courts ordered medical insurance cover to pay for cannabis medications in Germany. Be interesting to see if you could create a case here in the UK whereby people who had medical insurance were now able to have their cannabis medications paid for. So I'm biased, I'm a lawyer. I do think there are ways to open up this market and make changes for the better for businesses and for patients through the courts rather than the efforts lobbying a government which clearly has no interest in engaging in progressing this industry.
I agree completely. And listen, Rob, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I always get left with more questions, I think, as I try to feel my way through the regulatory framework. I know I speak on behalf of myself, my colleagues and everybody in the industry and the personal sacrifice and hard work you put in. And putting up with me, I think once a quarter, I try and get myself in your diary to ask you a load of questions that I don't really know the answers to. And that will probably continue for some time to come.
No, thank you, Tim. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much today. Thank you.